Welcome to another episode of Life Imitating Movies, a weekly podcast where myself and my co host Brad, we talk about news stories from across the internet, the lighter side of news maybe from the past week, and the movies that we think have already been made that resemble these stories. So, Brad, how you doing this week?
I'm pretty good. A little tired. Been a busy week, but a nice Friday podcast always makes the mood good.
Sounds like busy in a good way, at least. You can't complain about that these days.
That is true. Yeah, that's true.
So, before we get into our opening question, we just wanted to make a note here. We did a story last week on the hit and run involving actress Lisa Baines, and unfortunately, she has passed away now from injuries sustained in the accident. So, very bad story. She's been, like we touched upon last week, she was in Gone Girl and including other parts in movies and TV shows across her career. And really a theater actress. She had a theater background as well, so it just really tragic to see somebody die like that in a hit and run, and she passed away from her injuries. So we hope that people are aware of this and that if you see something like this, that maybe you'll be the one to report something like this in real life. So wish her family and her wife and everything all the best. So
Yeah,
let's
it's
switch
very
gears. Let's get into it a little bit. We talked about this story already. Let's not dwell on it too much. But the opening question I posed this week was, what is your favorite movie score and your favorite movie soundtrack? Because they're two very different things. And Brad, if you want to kind of just give a brief explanation for the average listener about the difference between the two of those.
so. A score is pretty much music only. It's what underlines a scene, just like the orchestral music that plays under a scene. Um, a soundtrack is music. It's like usually songs with words. Soundtrack can be like an original soundtrack from a musical, or it can also be compilation of like already established songs that just play in the movie. So that's pretty much the difference.
Absolutely. So I'll go first with my answer. I knew off the top of my head that I was probably going to pick a couple different composers. Like they were at the top of my answer for my favorite movie score. And my answer for that part of the question, the first part of it, was my favorite movie score is from The Dark Knight, which was obviously composed by Hans Zimmer, one of my favorite film composers these days. Hans Zimmer, John Williams. I knew I was going to pick one of these. So The Dark Knight, just very interesting, dark music that sets the scene for the movie and very experimental and just a great job by Hans Zimmer overall. And I can just listen to the score from that movie just by itself. It's very dark, very moody, very, very great.
Yeah, dude, Dark Knight score is phenomenal. All three of them are good. You listen to them as one fell swoop from Batman Begins all the way through Dark Knight Rises. I mean, The Dark Knight Rises, that last piece of film score from that one is like one of my all-time favorite pieces of music. And Dark Knight, the opening heist kind of scene with that music, that's that like I think they've used that music a lot in like other trailers and movies and stuff because it's so like such a perfect heist piece of music.
Absolutely. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, my favorite movie soundtrack, and this one just came to me off the top of my head, is the soundtrack to the movie American Pie 2. And that's because there are so many songs in that movie that I had on my iPod as a middle schooler, as a high schooler, these early 2000s, late 90s pop, rock, punk rock songs. And I could just jam to the soundtrack in that movie. It's still a funny movie, but I love just the songs that come up in it and just jamming along to them. And that was almost all of them in the movie were on my iPod when I was a little kid.
Yeah, dude, American Pie. Those soundtracks were like very like Blink 182. Those are the bands that are on those soundtracks, and yeah, they're good. They go with the movie really well. And American Pie 2 for me is like one of my all time. It's like one of those summer movies I love. The American Pie 2 is one of the better sequels I think ever made.
Well, I don't know about that, but let's hear your answers
Really?
for your favorites.
I mean, I didn't go too far out. I knew exactly what my answers were for both of these. My score, we've talked about it before. My favorite score of all time is Interstellar. The organs that they use in that movie, there's a whole doc. They did a documentary on the Blu-ray about how they made this score, and it's just Hans Zimmer and Chris Nolan in a massive church, and the organ players just sitting there going at the organ, the church organ, and I mean, it is by far the best score I think I've ever heard in my life. And so for my favorite soundtrack, again, it's another movie I think we've talked about. And I was wondering if you wanted me to pick a movie like An American Pie 2 that had a compilation soundtrack or a musical that had its original music. I went musical because my all-time favorite soundtrack is La La Land.
I
Yeah.
definitely could have predicted both of those. I wanted to be maybe a little bit surprised, so obviously I didn't just take a guess at what they were, but those I probably knew were your go-to answers.
Yeah, we'll discuss more of the soundtrack to La La Land later when we talk about our favorite movie, just because it's La La Land is a soundtrack that's like I can listen to it in my car, and that's what makes it stand out. All right, so to kick things off, my first story was this week. There was the editor or whatever of Spider-Man 4 released what would have been a scene from the proposed Spider-Man 4, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man 4, with an animatic that was going to be what the scene was. So, Mitch, if you want to go ahead and explain what an animatic is.
Sure. So, as a former animation major, I actually not only know what an animatic is because not a lot of people at home might know, but I've actually made them for class projects. So, essentially, what an animatic is, you have storyboards, which are drawings, rough drawings of what a scene is going to look like and the actions that are going to happen, little arrows and characters and where they're going to be in the scene, how it's going to look on camera. And they basically just stitch them all together in a little movie with maybe a couple little lines of voiceover or sound effects, and it's essentially like an animated storyboard. So when we say animatic, that's what that means, that we got a rough drawing kind of animated preview about what this scene would have looked like.
Yeah, and they're pretty cool to see. You ever watch behind the scenes features on Blu-rays or whatever, and they have side by side comparisons? Maybe it's for film nerds like us, but they're actually pretty gnarly to watch and see. I mean, I'm always amazed at storyboards, how detailed storyboards are, and then animatics just being the animated version of that. It's like it's a skill I don't have. I can't draw, and so when I see a skill like that, I'm like, wow, that's awesome.
Well, despite being an animation major in college, I can't draw either. And I'm the same way. I enjoy watching those animatics. I remember when I watched the one for The Incredibles on the Blu ray, DVD, whatever it was, I liked seeing that how, oh, this is how they put that screen to page, how they drew it out, and how they pictured it initially. So I think it's interesting. And if you want to look them up for yourself, go ahead, because I think, again, you might get something out of them. But what did you pick relating to this story? Because obviously this was a Spider-Man 4 that we never got to see. Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire. So what did you picture when you thought about this?
I just went with Spider-Man. I mean, I figured we could just have a discussion about the Spider-Man universe, the original Spider-Man universe, and so I will just pick the original Spider-Man.
Sure. So I picked Spider-Man 3 because it was the last movie before this proposed Spider-Man 4 that never happened. But we could just use it, since we picked both of those, as an excuse to just talk a little bit about the original Spider-Man trilogy that came out with Tobey Maguire.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because like the first one came out, it was the first movie that ever opened to over $100 million. It was $116 million, I believe, and so that kind of really became the catalyst for what we see as the Marvel Cinematic Universe right now. Because before Spider-Man came out and X-Men slightly before it, comic book movies were dying a slow death at the box office, and Spider-Man kind of really reinvigorated the genre.
I think so, because somebody has to do it first, and Spider-Man really came along and invigorated that superhero genre that makes hundreds of millions of dollars now. So it's crazy to think that that was the first movie that cracked that number at the box office, because these days movies gross hundreds of millions of dollars just by themselves, not even a franchise, but just summer blockbusters or superhero movies or whatever it may be, animated Disney movies that crack $1 billion. So this number may seem a little insignificant now in 2021, but back then, this was a big deal.
Yeah, man. And it was also the kickoff of like superhero movies hiring niche directors because Sam Raimi was known for Evil Dead series and stuff like that. He was known for some violent R-rated, horror movies. And then this really kicked off them hiring these niche directors, which led to Chris Nolan, who was only known for like Memento and Insomnia before taking on Batman. And so it really led to like these stylized directors taking on big franchise pictures.
Absolutely, and obviously it really paid off in hindsight. But what do you want to talk about with this franchise? And we'll keep it a little bit brief because obviously people know these movies. People at some point in their lives have seen clips or have seen one or the other or all three of them. People know this franchise. So I think when you talk about the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, they were, I think for me, they were a little mixed. They had their good parts and their bad parts, but people still hold Spider-Man 2 as one of the greatest superhero movies of all time. So what do you think when you think of this franchise?
I very much I enjoy the franchise. I mean, obviously, I'm with the masses in Spider-Man 3 when they had emo Peter Parker walking down the street, like what's happening here, and because this story specifically says that Sam Raimi passed on Spider-Man 4 because he didn't like the script. So I'm like, even if that animatic was pretty gnarly looking, which I actually couldn't even watch it. When I clicked on it, it said the link was private for some reason. I don't know what that's about. I post a story, can't get to the link, but the comments for people who did see it said the animatic was really gnarly looking. But Sam Raimi said the script wasn't bad. And that makes me think, okay, if we got a Spider-Man 4, it probably wouldn't have been that good.
Yeah, this could have been a potential Batman and Robin where the franchise was successful up to that point, and then they wanted the studio and whoever else wanted to get another movie out as quickly as possible, and the quality maybe would have suffered because of it. So that's something that I hear a lot when they would have talked about the future of the Spider-Man franchise with Tobey Maguire. So I'm not overly sad that we never got to see it because it sounded like all things considered, it could have been another so-so effort.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens because I think they said Spider-Man. I don't know what the new title. I forget what the new title is, but the new Marvel Cinematic Spider-Man movie is bringing back Alfred Molina as Doc Ock and stuff. So I'm very much looking forward to that this December to see what's going on with what they're doing with that franchise because it's very interesting.
Absolutely, and hopefully we get a trailer soon because I know you and me, we just try to watch one trailer just to get an idea of the movie and then nothing else, no clips, no other trailers, no spoilers, no this or that or interviews or anything. Just get an idea of the movie and then see it for yourself in the theater. And I'm very much looking forward to see what that might look like, just a glimpse at it, and then that's it. So during this past week, for people who may have noticed looking up in the sky or had it on their calendars, there was a solar eclipse in some parts of the world that people were able to see in places like the UK and other places around the world where not everyone was able to see the eclipse in its entirety, but like any event like this, people were definitely able to see it and at least take part in it a little bit. So it's always astounding when you see something like this. I didn't really get to see it, or maybe I wasn't in a part of the world that was able to, but I know you love stories like this, just space and phenomenon and stuff like that.
Yeah, dude. And I looked at the picture. Obviously, I didn't see it in person, but there were pictures online. Like a boat caught a picture from, I don't know where it was from, but where the sun was coming over the horizon, and it just looked like devil horns before it had fully come up. And I was like, that's such an awesome picture, man.
So obviously, solar eclipse, we've seen this in a couple different movies, and it's obviously been in a few different genres, whether it's affected something or it's just been a phenomenon in the background. But in my movie, it's kind of been a central plot point. It didn't really affect the story, but it's where something happened. And that's the movie Gerald's Game. And if you had not heard of this one or seen it, it maybe flew a little bit under the radar. It's a horror movie directed by Mike Flanagan, who, if you know the name, is big in the horror genre recently. And I think this movie is a good adaptation of a Stephen King book, which it's based on, and just phenomenal acting performances in it as well. And the solar eclipse, this is a fairly recent movie, so I won't say what happens around that event, but still a very good movie that I would definitely recommend to people.
Well, congratulations, you've picked one I've never even heard of. So I'll do the Mitch thing. Is this one you would recommend to people, or?
Absolutely, because the actress at the center of it is Carla, and if I'm saying her last name right, Gugino. And I love everything that she's in. She is a great, underrated actress. I feel like maybe not enough people give her credit for the things that she's in. But again, I wouldn't really say this is a very overtly scary horror movie. It's more like a survival horror movie, and I can't really give too much away, but go ahead and look at the trailer online, and it gives you an idea of what happens in the movie. But I think it's actually a Netflix original, but I would still definitely recommend it to people because, all hearing all these things and maybe adds up to, and it doesn't really sound like I didn't know about it. It's a Netflix original. It has, not Brad Pitt in it. I don't know if I want to see it. Well, I would definitely still recommend it.
Right on. And I guess give people a little bit who's Mike Flanagan. I know who Mike Flanagan is, but why don't you tell people who Mike Flanagan is so that they're like, oh, okay, I like this stuff.
So Mike Flanagan, some of the bigger projects that he's been involved in have been Netflix's Haunting of Blank series, Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor. He's been at the helm for those, and they've gotten a lot of praise from fans of the horror genre. And one of his most recent and most successful movies that he's directed has been Doctor Sleep, which is the sequel to The Shining starring Ewan McGregor, which I really love that movie. And Mike Flanagan is one of those guys that I can't wait to see what he does next.
Yeah, I may have to check that out if you say it's a solid horror movie. I usually watch my horror movies around Halloween, but I'll give it a watch. There are a couple other you mentioned in a few weeks back that were horror movies that are on my list, so I'll go to you for my horror recommendations. All right, so to switch it over, I wasn't sure if you were going to pop in, but to switch it over to my movie, it's a movie that came out a long time ago. Not really long, I think 2008, but it's a Nicolas Cage movie. It's called Knowing. You see, okay, there you go, good. You've seen Knowing. I absolutely love Knowing. It was directed by Alex Perez, who did The Crow, did Dark City, one of the most underrated movies ever made. And the reason I picked it is the story revolves around the sun dying. That is the purpose of the movie. And it's about like weird people coming to Earth and like weird premonitions. And I think it's one of the most underrated movies to come out in the last 15 years because it didn't get a lot of play, but it's such a great science fiction movie.
Yeah, I think this is another under the radar one, especially with Nicolas Cage, because it's not one of his most well known movies that he was in, or even one of his most recent, because this was I think it was a mid 2000s movie that came out. But this is still one that I at least give it credit for, that it has an interesting premise. Like you always say, Nicolas Cage always goes full tilt, whether he's in a bad movie, a good movie, a so-so movie. So this is one that I think probably has some entertainment value for people.
Yeah, dude. And it has it's one of those it starts off where it's just a mystery and it's about like an underground, the time capsule. The time capsule comes up and there's numbers that are correlating with events of tragic events of the world, mass tragedies in the world, and it's one of those movies where you don't know what is happening until the final frame rolls and you're like, oh. And I just, that was, any movie that can make me go, oh, I'm like, right on, I like that movie. All right, so the next story I got was that Taco Bell is giving away free tacos to vaccinated people. The reason I picked this story is because I wanted to call Taco Bell out for it only being in California. I'm 3,000 miles away, Taco Bell. I want a free taco. What are you doing to me?
I'm the same way too because I'm a big Taco Bell fan. But to be fair, if you would prefer another state, you personally, that they would give free tacos to, it would probably be California.
That is, yeah, there you go. That is true.
So yeah, it's a shame that they're not doing this in our area, or when we got vaccinated a little bit earlier, that they're offering all these prizes and incentives for people nowadays. But good for them, to try and say, hey, here's some free stuff, just for doing this. So good for them. Hopefully people enjoy some free tacos.
Yeah, I wrote I was like I like that some states are giving away $40,000. In California, it's like nah, you get some free tacos.
Beggars can't be choosers.
That's
So
true.
obviously, this is maybe a little bit tough to tie into a movie scene where you have to find a scene that tacos are in or something. So what did you pick relating to this story?
Originally, I had Demolition Man, and then I know we've talked about Demolition Man ad nauseum. So I picked I went with a movie that celebrates Mexican heritage, I guess, and that's Coco. The Disney Pixar movie Coco, and for me, that's one of the better Pixar. To say one of the better Pixar movies is almost at this point like how do you even pick? They're all the Pixar movies are great. There hasn't been one well, there has been one. Brave, not a big fan, but for the most part, Pixar just knocks it out of the park. And Coco is it's a really good one, man. And it's one of those where if you're watching it, you watch it like this a lot because it is a sad movie too.
Yeah, I think you put it well when you say most of the time they knock it out of the park because people don't like every single movie that's come out, but a lot of them have gotten universal praise. And I'll be honest, I haven't seen Coco yet. It's sitting on my watch list, so I've heard it's emotional. I'm sure it's great and it's different, and it certainly looks colorful for being about ghosts or the afterlife or something. So I'm sure I'll check it out one of these days soon.
Definitely check it out, dude. I was watching it not long ago with like my nieces. They're my best friend's daughters and stuff. They just you know how it is. I'm essentially their uncle. But we were watching it, and I was like, I really like Soul better than Coco, and so they made me sit and watch Coco the entire movie with them. They're like, how can you like Soul better than Coco? Coco's like the best Pixar movie ever. And I'm like, it is phenomenal, but I just like Soul a little bit better. There's something about Soul that I just like a little bit better. But Coco is it won Best Animated Feature. The song "Remember Me" is a phenomenal song, and they sing "Remember Me." It's really cute. They're very cute kids. But yeah, check it out.
Sure. So I went a little bit different. I did a little bit of digging to find the scene where tacos appeared in a movie. And I thought, oh, here's a popular one off the top of my head. And that's Avengers Endgame. And there's a scene in that long movie where Paul Rudd, Ant Man, is having tacos for lunch and then they get blown out of his hand. And then Mark Ruffalo's Hulk comes up and gives him a couple tacos to have for lunch to replace the ones that he lost. So a funny little scene. There are a lot of them in the movie. So obviously we've talked about Avengers Endgame before. We've talked about the Marvel Universe a ton, even earlier in this episode. So anything particular you wanted to highlight about this movie? Because just for me, if you followed along from the beginning, there's a lot there to like as a fan of this franchise. If you're just coming in cold, maybe it's not the best movie for you, but for me, I really enjoyed it having followed along from the beginning.
Yeah, I'll say you must have loved that movie to remember the taco scene. I don't remember the taco scene from Avengers Endgame, but yeah, I mean, I guess the Avengers movies do have funny food scenes. I mean, the shawarma scene from the first movie, and then taco scene from Endgame. So nothing really that. Reviews have started trickling in for the next Marvel movie, which is Black Widow, and they seem to be pretty solid. So I'm looking forward to that.
So Avengers Endgame, obviously a huge milestone, a huge movie. What more can be said about it? We've covered it before on the show, so let's move on to our next story here. So some people around the country might be blissfully unaware of this, but for those of us here in Maryland and other parts of the country, we are being swarmed by cicadas, and they are just causing all sorts of different incidents and things to happen where they fly into people's windows while they're driving and cause accidents. They cause delays or funny things to happen on camera for people who are outside, and they're just wreaking all sorts of havoc. And me personally, I can't wait until they're gone this season.
Yeah, dude, my car is right now. It's destroyed. I have a million cicada guts all over my car, and I'm like eagerly anticipating washing my car, which I never anticipate washing my car.
Yeah, my windshield has taken a beating for when I'm driving here in Maryland on the highway, and there's some trees on the side of the road which cicadas hang out in, and it's just plunk, 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 plunk. Every 30 seconds, the cicadas hitting my car, so my car is taking a beating too. So for this
See, I
story,
actually,
uh,
so I wanted to touch on that, but it's just That's the one thing I've enjoyed about the cicadas, and maybe I'm just a sick person. But I love driving down the highway, and it feels like you're in an apocalyptic movie where they're just like boom, boom, every like 2 seconds. You're just like boom. It just feels like you're in like a Alfred Hitchcock movie with all these cicadas hitting your window.
Well, that's a good segue to my movie because to me, the cicadas are like a plague of locusts. This is what it must have been like in the old days when people talked about this. And that is the movie The Prince of Egypt. And for those of you who may not know, this was an animated movie from the 90s about this whole, essentially the story of Passover, about Moses and the Jews and Egypt and slavery. But for those who are being turned off by hearing that, it's definitely a mainstream audience movie. It makes it approachable. There's plenty of good animation and I guess I would say action too, but it tells the story in a really interesting movie like way instead of a really religious way. And by the way, I'm not even going to name all of them because there's just too many, but it has a phenomenal voice cast.
I've never seen Prince of Egypt. I'll be honest, I probably will never see Prince of Egypt. It's not a movie that really flies high on my.
I would recommend that you do because I feel like you would really like the soundtrack. I wouldn't necessarily call it a musical, but they do have a handful of singing numbers in there that I think finding this hidden gem, this treasure that you never knew about from, I think about 20 years ago, more than that probably, that I think you might like the soundtrack at least if you gave it a watch.
I don't know, that may have sold me. So it's a animated kids movie about the plague. Is that what it's about?
I wouldn't exactly call it a kids movie. I wouldn't say it's G. I wouldn't say it's kid friendly, but it's an animated movie. But you know better than anyone, including me, that that animation medium doesn't necessarily mean just for kids. So I wouldn't
Right, right,
say
right.
it's super graphic or horror or anything like that. But it has definitely some themes, obviously, based on that story that are a little more adult.
Right on. I may check it out one day if I go into like a animated movie marathon. I may throw it on the list. I mean, you sell me on music. You tell me a movie has good music, I'll watch anything pretty much. So that was a good selling point. But I'll move along to my pick. I don't think we've talked about this movie before. We may have. My memory is not very good. But I went with so big story that came out with the cicadas was the president's plane or something like that couldn't take off recently. It might have been the press corps plane or something couldn't take off recently because of the cicadas because they were worried they were going to fly into the engine. And what's the most famous movie about something flying into an engine? Sully. Ah.
I
So
really, I
Sully
really
had.
thought you were going to go Air Force One with that one about a presidential plane or something affecting a plane or a story on a plane. So I really thought you were going to go Air Force One, but Sully, obviously, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, well, Air Force. Well, we will talk about Air Force one day. I do love that movie, but Sully I think fits more into this one where it was they took off and was a pigeon or a bird or something flew into the engine. They had to land the plane in the Hudson River, which ties into I think Biden just announced Sully Sullenberger is like the head of the aviation or something like that. I don't know Sully, but and Sully was in Daddy's Home too. I don't know if you ever saw that, but he has a funny cameo in that. But the movie, let's get to the movie. It's one of my favorite. I absolutely love the movie. It is a Tom Hanks movie directed by Clint Eastwood. It's I believe it's pretty accurate in terms of like how the NTB, whatever the government officials who were trying to say Sully could have like brought the plane back to Newark Airport or whatever to land, and he's just like, no, I couldn't have. And it's like a really great story about like the inner workings of what happened with this story that was called "What's a Miracle on the Hudson."
Sure. So I'll be honest, I haven't seen this one yet either, but it is one that I am interested in seeing because it covers this genre that I've talked about before that I really like, which is this historical drama based on real events that depicts them with really great actors, really great directors. So this is definitely one that I will check out at some point, and I'm sure I'll like the story behind it because everybody knows the story behind it.
Yeah, dude, I would. This is one I would say move to the top of your list. It's a phenomenal movie, and if it's a genre you like, dude, this one knocks it out of the park. I mean, Tom Hanks. again, I think he gets overlooked a lot for awards love because I think when you see a Tom Hanks movie, you're like, I expect it to be good, and he is good, and that's what we expected. Where it's like, no, dude, Tom Hanks is more than good. Tom Hanks should be nominated. He should be like Meryl Streep. Every time he makes a movie, he should be nominated. He is that good. Nah, so my last story was there's a pretty crazy story this week that came out about a dude who was a lobster diver or something, and he actually got swallowed by a humpback whale, and the humpback whale spit him out. Which you're like, oh wow, that's so lucky. But when you actually read the article or read like the science, they talk to like scientists, whale experts and stuff. Apparently, a whale's throat is only the size of your fist. Which I was like, really? Like a giant animal like that, they can only swallow. That's why they eat krill and fish and stuff, because they can only swallow that. And so any human that gets swallowed by a whale would be spit back out because they can't swallow it.
Yeah, so, really lucky that this guy wasn't able to be eaten by the whale because that would have been terrifying. I'm sure it was scary in the moment when it happened too. And the guy's okay, a few bumps and bruises after being almost eaten by a whale, but luckily they can't really eat something the size of a human. So, great story to tell the grandkids one day.
Yeah, dude, that dude has a unique story. I mean, it's kind of he'll be able to write a book. He'll be able to make some scratch off of this story for years to come.
So there's a very clear movie that goes along with this, and I'd be surprised and maybe not surprised if we picked the same one. But for me, relating to this story about almost getting eaten by a whale, I picked the original animated Pinocchio movie from Disney way back in the 1930s, 40s, whenever it came out, that maybe not a lot of people have seen because we've got a lot of iterations of Pinocchio over the years.
Yeah, I did not pick Pinocchio. I haven't seen Pinocchio probably since I was a little kid, so I didn't even remember that was a thing. So
Well, which is funny because it's the thing, it's the scene that people remember when they're almost eaten by the whale, and that is like the main kind of conflict or the shot or the part of the story that people remember, other than the nose getting bigger when he lies. So that's definitely an animated classic. I would definitely recommend you see it at least once if you've never seen it. It's like Snow White and these other very early animated movies that Disney did way back when they first started, that Dumbo, others like that, where you should watch them at least once.
yeah, I mean, I actually will probably watch it because I think Robert Zemeckis and Tom Hanks are making a new Pinocchio movie where Tom Hanks is playing Geppetto. So full circle. So my movie, I went with another animated film, a Pixar classic. I went with Finding Nemo. There you go. I thought that is where you were going because there is a scene in Finding Nemo where they get sucked up by a whale and they're in the whale's mouth.
Yeah, so Finding Nemo was the second movie that I thought about, but for me, Pinocchio was that original getting eaten by a whale scene in a movie because it's famous, it's from the story that the movie is originally based on, and Finding Nemo obviously came much later, but that of course popped into my mind when I read the story too. And Finding Nemo, like we said before, it's a Pixar classic. It's one of these ones that they hit it out of the ballpark. It's funny, it's heartfelt, it's different visually. So Finding Nemo is definitely a classic in its own right.
Yeah, man, I love Finding Nemo and I love Finding Dory. I thought Finding Dory was a solid sequel. And yeah, Finding Nemo. I mean, I love the turtle. The turtle in Finding Nemo. I think everybody loves the turtle. He's like on the EHC, bro. It's my Cali roots. So that. But yeah, Finding Nemo. Again, like I said with Coco, dude, you can't. It's so hard to pick. I guess it's not hard to pick a favorite Pixar movie because if you knock Toy Story out of it, because you have to knock Toy Story out of it, because I think everybody would say Toy Story is the all-time best. But I go Wall-E is my favorite, and then after that, probably Finding Nemo, because Finding Nemo is a pretty damn near perfect movie.
So our last story from the week here ties into our movie of the week that we'll get to in a second, which is In the Heights. But the story here is that In the Heights, opening this week, didn't quite do as well as people thought it would at the box office, at least domestically and maybe internationally too. But the jury's still out on what it's going to do overall. It might make a little bit of a recovery, but it didn't open as well as people thought it would. So Why do you think this is? Because I have my guesses.
Um, it they said that it premiered also on HBO Plus or whatever it's called, HBO Max, and they said that that took away some of the numbers from it. But then an independent company came out and said that it had a pretty soft debut on HBO Max as well. It, I don't know, man. The trailer for it was phenomenal. Maybe just that year wait in between had people saying, losing a little fervor to coin a phrase, losing a little bit of anticipation for it that translated to poor box office.
Sure. So some of the reasons that people gave this for underperforming was that maybe people didn't really know that much about the Broadway show, that the marketing for the movie wasn't really as big as it could have been. That's one of the things that people say too is that, oh, it was simultaneously streaming for free for HBO Max subscribers, so why would they go to the theater? But to be fair, Godzilla vs. Kong made a good amount of money at the box office, and that did the same thing too with the simultaneous streaming release. So people have their guesses, their reasons, but I think personally, maybe musicals, they don't rake in the box office dollars like other movies do. That again, maybe there was just a lack of knowledge that this movie was going to be out at this time, or that people just had a lack of interest, or just musicals. The people that like them obviously are very invested, but maybe for the average moviegoers, it's a toss up whether or not they see the latest musical that comes out.
Yeah, but I will. Musicals have legs at the box office. If you remember, Greatest Showman started off horribly at theater. It was a bomb the first weekend, and then what happened was it stayed in the top five, or it stayed number one at the box office for equal to, or maybe even beat Titanic's record of like 13 or 14 weeks in the top of the box office chart. So musicals, good musicals, have legs. Greatest Showman, I think one of the best musicals ever. So I do think when all is said and done, this movie's gonna leg out. I think this movie's gonna turn a profit. I think it's gonna do, in the long run, I think it will be a success story. But the opening week headlines could potentially dim people from seeing it, because that's all people see, the headlines, and like, I'm not gonna waste my time. But yeah, I think it could have legs.
Sure, that's fair. So, did you pick In the Heights related to the story about the In the Heights box office?
I figured we could all just roll it right into the whole movie of the week, last story. So yeah, I went In the Heights.
Sure. So I picked In the Heights too as a segue into this movie of the week. So let's just get right into it. This is your movie. This is the kind of genre you really like. I will say up top, just we give our kind of general opinions before we start discussing these. But I will say overall, I liked it. I'm not a huge musicals person. I don't mind them, but I don't go actively seeking them. I'm not the first in line to see them, but I certainly don't mind them. So I will say up top, I liked it.
I very, very, very much liked it. I thought it was pretty damn good, man. And yes, I went to the theaters to see this, even though I could watch it on HBO Max. This was one where a musical, you need the environment of a big screen and the sound blasting in. The musical for me is an experience. And the first time you watch a movie like that, if you don't have the experience, the theatrical experience of a musical, it can kind of degrade it a little bit if you're just watching it on your home TV with, crappy speakers coming out of the back. So I went to the theater. Me and my friend went to the theater. We saw it. Unfortunately, we did have two people about 5 seats away from us who would not shut the hell up. And at one point, I get belligerent in movies if people talk. If people are rude in theaters, I am not a good person to be around. And but I looked at my friend. I asked her. I said, are they annoying you as much as they're annoying me? And she can kind of get embarrassed because I saw Greatest Showman with her as well, and she got embarrassed when I told people to shut the hell up. So that's why I looked at her and asked that. I was like, are they? And she's like, nah, they're not yet. So I didn't say anything to them because I didn't want to embarrass her. But man, I was ready to lay into these people because it was just the bass of their voice. Just
Right. So I'm gonna cut you off because you're getting on a little bit of a rant there, but
yeah.
we're distracting from the topic. But look, I will say that is a big pet peeve for me too, is when people talk in movies. That's literally the one thing you can't do. But getting back to the movie, I will certainly agree with that, where the experience probably it hits you more when you're seeing it in a theater and you have the songs blasting at you, and especially these days visually seeing it on a big screen. And because I think they did some great things within the Heights with choreography and the shots and the colors and the settings. So I get that it probably hits a lot harder when you see it in theaters versus how I saw it at home.
Yeah, and the story for In the Heights is really good. It's a story about dreaming. It's a story about a guy who has a dream, and then through the story he realizes what his dream really is. And it's a simple story, I think, but the songs in the movie, I will say, even though I did buy the soundtrack, um, the songs in the movie, they're not like the La La Land in the beginning. La La Land is a soundtrack I can listen to in my car, every song. It's great. I will be the guy at the stoplight, like, all right, yeah, I'm listening to La La Land. What's up? This one, I'm not so sure I'm going to be throwing it out in the car too much. It doesn't have too many songs that you're like, oh hell yeah. The opening track, In the Heights, phenomenal. The lottery song, if you remember the lottery song at the pool, love that song, love that scene.
So
Um,
I'm going to cut you off again because that was my very next question was what were some of your favorites? Because when I looked it up and I did some research after I see the movie, I didn't realize just how quite how many songs were in it. They were, I think, around 18 or so, if I got that right. But and people obviously have their favorites. So, what did you say were some of your favorites? Because people, again, who like musicals, probably had a few tracks that stood out that they were like, I really love this one, but this one wasn't as good.
yeah, so you hit it close. 17 tracks on the soundtrack, at least. Yeah, like I said, In the Heights, the opening track, phenomenal. 96,000 is the lottery song at the pool, which I absolutely love that scene. I like Lin Manuel's Piragua song, where talking about the snow cones and stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. yeah. The finale and stuff. Those are the good songs. Like that's what I'm saying. It's like two or three songs where I'm like, I'll listen to those songs on a repeated basis. Apart from that, a lot of the songs were very Broadway-y in that they were decent songs, but they were more like this is the story, so this is the song. They weren't like pop songs, which I kind of like. They were more like we need to tell the story through the song, and those aren't the ones that you're going to listen to a million times.
Sure. So maybe people who are more Broadway fans maybe think the opposite, that they liked those songs more, and maybe the more generic or kind of pop sounding songs that they didn't like as less. So people who are fans of musicals obviously have their favorites and are going to form opinions about which songs were better than others and debate about it. But yeah, I mean, look, I said up top that I'm not a huge musical fan. I could certainly appreciate them, of course, but I will say that those were a couple of the standouts to me as well. The In the Heights, the opening number. I did like the 96,000 one as well. There were a couple others, titles off the top of my head. I can't really think of them, but again, I certainly enjoyed it. It was different and it was capturing a different sort of people and environment and themes. And like you said, everyone can relate to this because everyone has dreams and goals. And I like that there was still a story at its core, kind of connecting everything.
Yeah, and I mean it's the cast was great, man. I think the lead guy Anthony Ramos was also in Hamilton, and there were a couple little Hamilton people in the movie. They're like, oh, right on. They brought him on from like the Mr. Frosty guy was he was in Hamilton as well, and so you're like, oh, nice. I know that guy, and the movie was shot really beautifully. Like I love the shots in the movie. I love the look of the movie. It's what John M. Chu, who also did Crazy Rich Asians, which was an excellent movie. He did the GI Joe follow up, I believe was his as well, GI Joe Retaliation. I thought that was a pretty solid follow up movie. So I enjoy that guy's directing.
Yeah, I enjoyed John Chu as a director as well, and I can't wait if they do make them because it's so up in the air about the Crazy Rich Asians sequels. But I really love John Chu as a director. When you get him and Lin Manuel Miranda together, this was just a winning combination, regardless of whether you liked musicals or didn't like the songs or whatever it was. You can't argue with the direction, the visuals, the effort that was put into the music. You can't argue with the things that that pair did with this movie.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, it's an interesting. I would like to see the Broadway play. I don't know if it still plays at all. If it's going to be one of the, I don't, they have plays that play for 30 years, and they have plays that end after a single run. Because I was reading up on it, and apparently the play has a bunch more songs in it and stuff, and some of the characters were for a movie obviously you got to condense a lot of things, and so some of the characters were created, five characters brought into one character and stuff. And so the movie made me want to see the play.
That's fair, and we'll see if they maybe if the play isn't still around, if they bring it back because of the movie. Because again, maybe it wasn't as popular as they thought it would be, so maybe they'll bring the play back and try to reinvigorate the movie and sell tickets to the play as well, or maybe they'll play it safe and say the movie didn't do as well as we thought it did, so let's not bring the play back. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a I will watch it. I've already seen it twice in all honesty, because we watched it in theaters, and then a couple days later we were just sitting around and we put it on HBO Max and watched it again. So it is a movie I will watch over and over again. Is it my favorite musical? No. Is it top three? No. Was it a good movie that I thoroughly enjoyed? Absolutely.
So that leads me into my last question here, which is, would you recommend this to people? And when I say that, I mean the average moviegoer, someone who just sees movies occasionally, that sees something interesting, and then they go see it on a whim that they don't really know much about it. They're not a big movie junkie like us. So would you recommend this to the average person if they're so-so about musicals, if they're an average moviegoer? What would you really say about that?
I would recommend it because it's a feel good movie. There's no murder. There's no bad guy. It's just a movie about kind of life, man. It's a movie. I think it's a universal theme. It's about life, and I very much enjoyed that. I enjoy a movie that isn't like somebody dying all the time, or just a reprieve from life almost. And I thought this was an excellent reprieve from life. It was an excellent way for a 2 hour escape from horribleness that may be going on in the world.
I'll agree with you on that. I think it had something for everybody, whether you like the music, whether you like the visuals or the story or the actors or just the bright colors or the story behind it, where it's not aliens or a plague or something going on that's a large scale, heavy drama thing. I think it's just a light, feel good story that people can enjoy no matter who they are. So I'll agree with you on that. So I would definitely recommend In the Heights to people too. Like I said, I enjoyed it. I'm not a musical junkie, but I still very much thought it was an enjoyable, like you said, escape movie, which is what people do, what they go to the movies sometimes for.
100%. And I do remember the one point I did want to say, which was a negative, which is the trailer for this movie. One of the best trailers I had ever seen. The way they cut the song, the In the Heights song for the trailer, it's like I want that version. That version's not in the movie. That version's not available online. That version's not on the soundtrack. And it's like I'm making this plea to whoever makes music, man, put that version out, because that version of In the Heights with the score, the way it was cut, the beats in it is perfect.
Thank you to everybody for watching another episode of Life Imitating Movies, weekly podcast here with us where we discuss news, we discuss movies. And I think on this episode, we maybe picked some movies to recommend to people, some unknowns that people may not have heard of, that they might want to see, that sound intriguing. So I like to think we do that week to week, that we make some good picks here, that we have enlightened discussions. Hopefully we bring some new stuff to the table about the popular ones or the unknown ones. So I think this was a good episode, and I'm already looking forward to next week.
Yeah, you picked a few movies I had never heard of or seen. So next week, I'm going to have to make you look like an idiot. I'm going to pick a bunch of stuff you've never heard of.
Exactly. So we're looking forward to next week. Thank you for watching. If this is on YouTube, thank you for listening, whatever platform that may be on. And we'll be back again Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern, with a new episode of Life Imitating Movies next week.
Take it easy.